Good morning, and welcome to the Rady Executive Breakfast Series. My name is Monica Sellas, Director of Development at the Rady School of Management at UC San Diego. The Rady Breakfast Series started years ago to connect our Rady community with high-level executives to explore exciting and engaging topics. Today is no exception, as we have two amazing Rady School friends. One, a former CEO that will share with us his path from company leader to board of directors. And the other, a Rady alum who is a true Rady ambassador and a testament of our entrepreneurial roots and ethical values. Before we continue with our program, we want to give our most heartfelt thanks to Union Bank for sponsoring this event. Union Bank has been a strong partner of the Rady School of Management since its inception, and we could not be more grateful. To set the stage for this awaited event, it's now my pleasure to introduce our Dean, Lisa Ordonez.
Good morning, and it's my pleasure to have Bob here finally as our guest speaker. I am so impressed by his experience as a CEO of notable companies and using this to guide other CEOs now as independent director on various public boards. And Bob's generosity is shown as a fantastic advocate for more diverse and inclusive boards and a mentor to many successful female entrepreneurs. Leaders like Bob are what we need in our region to consider key ways to increase access, amplify creativity, and spark innovation. As we look ahead to solving the global challenges of our time through new business solutions, we envision fueling innovation through fostering inclusion and belonging in our region and beyond. At Rady, we are doubling down on our efforts to create access through fellowship and award opportunities for our students, continual mentorship, and investing in transformative research. Our collective future is in the hand of our talent at Rady, and we are proud to support the inclusive economy. I'm thrilled to share that we currently have over 50% female students across all of our graduate programs, including our PhD program, by the way. And we are actively thinking about how Rady can contribute to the larger conversation around diversifying boards. And before I introduce our very active alum, Kush Kapila, we will be facilitating this conversation with Bob today. I want to leave you with this thought. Creating greater access to business education involves all of us. We work together to define strategies in building an inclusive economy and more diversity in the boardroom. And as we're beginning to find out in our research, diversity in the boardroom and organization is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Companies that are more diverse and boards that are more diverse are more productive, more profitable, and more creative. So this works for all of us, and I'm glad that Bob is a partner in this with us. So I'd like to introduce you to one of our incredible alums, Kush Kapila, who's an MBA of 2010. Kush Kapila is a software and life science professional and founder CEO of Sterling's Mobile. Prior to Sterling's, Kapila had increasing positions of responsibility working in software, hardware for private and public companies, both in high-tech and medical device industries. Born and raised in Montreal, Kapila holds an undergraduate degree in computer science from McGill, a master's in bioinformatics from Concordia University, and what I consider the most important degree of all, an MBA from the Rady School of Management at UC San Diego. Kapila enjoys mentoring other startups and is currently the co-chair of Vistage on campus at UC San Diego, on the advisory board of Endeavor Bank, and an advisor to the Executive Oil Services. So with that, Kush, I'm going to hand it over to you, and thank you again, Bob, for joining us.
Thank you, Dean Ordonez and Monique, for the kind words. I am thrilled to have Bob here, Bob Mettler here today to talk about boards, give us his wisdom. He's been a fierce advocate for more inclusive boards, and given Dean Ordonez and the Rady School of Management's focus on having more inclusive community, I couldn't think of a more timely discussion today. So thank you again, Bob, for being here. I could probably spend the next hour talking about all your accomplishments, but we don't have that much time. So I'm just going to give the audience some of the highlights. You have an undergrad in economics from the University of Virginia and more than 40 years of retail experience. Most notably, you were the CEO of Macy's West from 2002 to 2008. And prior to that, president of Sears from 1993 to 2000, where you oversaw 220,000 employees and growth of 28 billion. I think you were instrumental in that campaign, Come See the Softer Side of Sears. I'm sure we all remember that one. Prior to being president of Sears, you were CEO of J.W. Robinson and Joske's. Very impressive, but equally impressive is your board experience. Some staples such as Steinmart, the Jones Group, and Quicksilver, to name a few. And currently you serve as a corporate advisor and independent director for the Children's Place. So thank you again, Bob, for opening up your home to us and giving us your wisdom. The topic today is equity, diversity, and inclusion on your board of directors. But before I get into that, our audience includes executives and CEOs, but also students and busy professionals. So I'm going to start off with a very simple question that might not be obvious to everyone. What is the purpose of a board? And could you give us a little bit of color around the different types of committees that public boards have?
Thanks, Kush, and thanks for the Rady School for their involvement and for their contact with me. And it is an amazing place. And not enough people really know about the great work that Rady is doing, providing for executives of the future. A board, the primary purpose of a board, many say, is to select the CEO of a company. If you read Wall Street Journal yesterday, Warren Buffett said the toughest and most important job a board has is the naming of a CEO. And that's only one of the responsibilities. And things have changed over the years, and it is a great deal of work. It's not a pleasure job. There's an enormous amount of paperwork. There are lots of government regulations, SEC, Security Exchange Commission regulations. Most people know about SOX, and others know about Dodd-Frank. They're complicated. And a board has usually three main committees. First is the Nominating and Governance Group. Second is the Audit Committee. And the third would be the Comp Committee. And all of them have unique responsibilities. That doesn't mean the other board members who are not on committees don't participate and are not informed about the work that these board committees conduct. Mm-hmm. And the amount of paperwork that comes through on a monthly basis, people think the board, well, you go to a meeting 3-4 times a year. The information comes monthly and sometimes weekly.
Mm-hmm. Of those three committees, is there anyone that's more important than another one?
Well, the one that is usually a little bit problematic is the Audit Committee, because the Audit Committee conducts the review of the performance of the company, how they account for expenditures. Mm-hmm. And of course, one of the other issues that a board's responsibility is the shareholder, and they are the advocates for shareholders in a company, and they're also advocates for the employees of a company. Mm-hmm. So I would say audit is probably the most important, but that doesn't diminish the other committees.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned one of the jobs is hiring that CEO. I think it's about 50% of boards. The CEO is also on the board. Is that something you recommend having, or?
Well, the CEO should be on the board. What used to be is that 2 or 3 members of management were part of the board, and that's no longer true. Mm-hmm. It's usually just the CEO, and that's appropriate, especially for some of the discussions that involve personnel, because the CEO has got to be confident that, one, he shares very private information with his board, and the best CEOs are very open with the board, And that's a very important part of the relationship between board members and the CEO.
Mhm. Should it be only the CEO from a company being on a board, or do you recommend
My-
any other
no.
executives?
No, I believe only the CEO.
Mhm.
Some companies have the CFO or COO, depending on the structure of their company. But I think it's the CEO is the most important.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean the board doesn't get exposure to top management. Every board I've been on, top management has certain responsibilities to the board that they participate in board meetings.
Mhm. That's right. So you're a big proponent of private companies also acting like
Yeah.
public companies.
Yeah.
Many people in our audience have private companies. When should they consider starting a board?
Well, I think that there are levels of business that it would be important to have a board. Even if it's a nominal payment to advisors, I think your advisors have to have some skin in the game and make them responsible for the kinds of work and kinds of advice that they give a company. But if a company is very small, I think that becomes too cumbersome. But once a company reaches, let's say, $10 million in revenue, it's an appropriate time to have a structure and a process where both committee meetings and advisors can help position the company and protect the company.
Mhm. And so depending on the size, I mean, there's no limit even for a public company of how many people can be on a board.
No,
What are your thoughts on like a rule of thumb?
I think that close to 10 for any company is plenty.
Mhm.
Over that, even in companies that multi-billion-dollar companies, I think it's too cumbersome. You got to have a very strong working relationship. And one of the things that many boards do is when they do self-evaluations is what does the board think about the processes themselves? How do they conduct themselves in meetings? How do they inquire about certain aspects of the company's performance? And when you get too many people, you get too many voices, and it gets very cloudy.
Okay. So talk about the purpose of a board. Why would anyone, why do you serve on boards?
Well, I looked at, when I retired, I was quite lucky that I had time and preparation for my after work job. And I looked at consulting, and I looked at finance, I looked at a lot of different things. I like the idea of strategic interface with people. I like the idea of helping people think through. And companies sometimes don't have enough time to think about how to position themselves for the future. And a lot of people go into boards thinking they're going to run a company. That is the furthest thing from the truth. And the idea of helping the CEO think through strategic positioning, and especially today as we have enormous changes, obviously with technology, obvious changes that one has to consider, and the CEO doesn't have all the answers.
Mhm. Were you on boards? You were on boards while you were at Macy's, while you were at Sears?
No, I was on some private board kind of consulting work, very little. Some people say the worst board members are CEOs. CEOs have a habit and a tendency to want to do everything themselves and bring to bear their own thoughts. No, I think that sitting CEOs are problematic to a board unless it's only one or two. And some CEOs are on 3 or 4 boards, and I think that's a mistake.
Mhm. So I think a lot of us can see the allure of being on a board, the prestige, the thought that it's only 4 meetings and they collect their big paychecks. But it's really, like you said, paperwork. It's not all glitz and glamour. It's a lot of work.
And there are legal responsibilities. everybody should know what the protection is for board members. D&O insurance, all public companies normally hire
D&O director,
director and officer.
Yeah.
So that they're protected from lawsuits. You know, we're a litigious society in this country. And somebody quoted to me just recently that of all the M&A activity, 95% of mergers have lawsuits behind them, which is a practice of making sure, on one hand, that the shareholders are protected, but on the other hand, it's a money-producing effort by certain law firms.
Have you been on a board that's been sued?
Yes.
Yeah,
I have.
Okay. So I can imagine that being on a board, you know, you have other CEOs, other, you know, successful people that get asked to be on boards, type A personalities. It must be a challenging environment to kind of get consensus. Have you had a situation where the board hasn't agreed on something, such as like the CEO's not performing, half of them think they are? How do you resolve those? And
Well, I served as in one company as head of the board, and the head of the board needs to reach consensus of all board members. When I say consensus, that doesn't mean 100%. It means overwhelming, and I should stress overwhelming, agree on a course of action. I would tell you that when we had on certain boards a disappointing performance, usually there was pretty good consensus that the company wasn't performing and needed to do something about a change in management. Never easy.
Yeah, I'm sure it isn't. What makes a good, or for that matter, a bad board member? Have you ever regretted joining a board? And what would you have wanted to know, you know, if you had regretted to know before that?
No, I've never regretted it. I did have some advice from some people about how to go about joining a board. And that is that I interviewed all of the existing board members. And I wanted to know them. I wanted to know why they joined the board. I wanted to know the good, the bad about this particular company and board. It's also an imperfect process, but it's better to have done that than not at all. And I think that when you get some really smart people who understand that they're there for the primary purpose that we discussed earlier, I think it works out pretty well. And boards today are very selective about who joins the board. And if those that don't have it, a skill matrix is a very integral part of how to choose a board member. You know, the old saying was the board was the CEO's old golfing buddies or poker playing buddies, and they were white men in suits. And to a certain extent, some boards still operate that way. Not many, because the times are changing, thank the Lord. And it is very important that people bring to the board a unique set of skills that don't exist on the boards. And, you know, you could ask, well, what are they? Well, certainly technology today, logistics today, marketing. Those are all aspects of skills that should be in a unique board member, not all board members, so that they have different experiences and they bring to the board a unique set of skills.
Okay. That was actually probably a good transition to move towards the topic of diversity and inclusion. So as you mentioned, and we talked about this, boards generally being not diverse, very homogeneous, older, white male. And, you know, the research has shown that having diversity makes better decisions. Do you have an example where you've in the past advocated for a more diverse board and seen the positive outcomes from that?
Well, I'll give you one example. I was interviewed for a board that I did not join because there was no inclusion.
Mhm.
And it was a difficult process to sit there with people who probably did not understand the importance of diversity on a board. So that's one example where I did not join a board. And I would say that because of the industry that I came from, retail industry is very much not dominated, but has included a lot of female executives. And so the aspect of women on boards was not an issue, either from my work experience or board experience. That being said, minority inclusion has not always been a good thing. When I say good thing, has not had enough minority inclusion. And that also is changing a great deal. I mean, when you think about who your consumer is, as I say, in the industry I was in, it's a fact that men's clothing, 75% of men's clothing is bought by women, not men. So the idea of not having a woman on the board of an apparel company doesn't make very much sense.
Yeah. So at the beginning, we talked about those 3 committees. Have you seen a diversity committee on boards? And is that something that should probably be added?
I don't think you need the committee to do that. I think you ought to have clear understanding especially from the head of the board about what's necessary for future board members. Every board that I've been on now has a skill matrix, and in that skill matrix are issues on diversity. And once you have that matrix and you check the boxes, there doesn't need to be that much discussion afterwards. It's clear and direct about what a board needs.
Okay. So you had mentioned, used to be that old boys club. The silver lining is last year there was a record number of women added to boards, and a few laws have been passed in California in the recent few years. One of them is to a certain amount of women, and just last year, AB 979 was about requiring public corporations to have a certain amount of the underrepresented community, Blacks, Latinos, Asians, LGBTQ. So we still have a long way to go. What more can we do to push this forward rather than just mandates from the state?
Well, I think there's a dual responsibility. There's the responsibility of the board, and there's the responsibility of prospective members of the board. So, it's a two-way street. And I think that people that want to be on boards need to address their own qualifications in a unique way. And lots of people don't realize the importance of a singular set of their abilities. For instance, if you're good in logistics, you ought to be the best in logistics. And if you're the best in a certain area of importance to a board, I think your opportunities are expanded.
Okay. So given these shifting attitudes of corporations, so corporations always been about profit, but that kind of definition of what corporate responsibilities has expanded. It's in the environment, it's about the customers, it's their employees. Those changes in the corporation's attitudes, the recent law changes, this might be a good time for people who haven't been on boards to get on boards. What advice would you give for those looking to join a board, and how do they get on it?
That's a toughie, by the way. I would be very open to networking and being as wide a net as possible, because you need to get yourself and your qualifications out there in some way that lots of people know who you are. Secondly, there are search companies that deal almost exclusively on board nominations and board work. And I would find a way to engage with a search firm that has work on board membership. Very, very important.
For the audience, could you give some names of some of the bigger
Well,
search
Spencer
firms?
Stewart, Heidrick and Struggles, Korn Ferry, all of them have unique members of their companies that specialize in board opportunities.
Mhm.
And the idea of hiring from a company standpoint, if hiring a consultant, is you don't get into that trap of who, your friends become your board members.
Mhm.
So very bad in the process, in my opinion.
And so let's say someone in our audience is given given a position on a board, or they've been interviewing and offered the position. How do they evaluate that a board would be right for them?
Well, as I say, I would interview each of the board members. Obviously, look at prior financial performance. Look at stated mission and goals from the company, and most companies today have a mission statement that is there, open for people to see. And then how do they perform against the goals that they've set for themselves?
Mhm.
And lots of people can write down, oh, I want to be the best at this and that, and yet they're not. And so it's important to take a look at it from the perspective of a user, someone that either buys the service or buys the product. And those are a few things that I think that people prospective board members ought to be aware of. And then look around, as I said earlier, who are the other board members? Who
Mhm.
joined this board? Why did they join the board?
Okay. So we talk about, you're passionate about mentoring the younger generation, and how did you get into that? And one of the things we talked about was getting a mentor, if you're a first-time board member, to have a mentor to help you kind of through that process. How do you go about finding that person?
Well, that's also tricky. Most of my interactions came on people that I've mentored have come from my involvement in business. And because I was the CEO, you're asked to speak at a variety of venues. When I say it's tricky, how often do you speak? And there are some people that are of the opinion that less is better. I tried to do a few. I didn't try to overdo it. You'll see that in some businesses, the same characters are up there on the podium often. But I do think having an opportunity to talk to a number of people who are interested either in the industry or the company that you represent is the way that a lot of my interactions with people who have asked me to help them in their careers and in their companies. And I love the idea of working with individuals. And, people this morning, I know we're on Zoom, but people said they're over Zoomed. And there was recently how many Zoom meetings you can attend. And I hope that we'll soon be in beyond just virtual. I think this is wonderful to be able to talk to as many people as we can today, but also nothing surpasses the idea of one-on-one or one-on-a-few interactions.
Those interactions between the mentor and mentee, how any guidelines around that? Is it just I found when I have a few mentors, and when I try to meet them, it's more of I try to have something in place, so I'm not just wasting their time. But any thoughts around that? How to interact with the mentor?
Well, for sure, open and honest interaction is paramount. Of being able to understand who you are, what's on your mind, no hidden agendas, and it isn't for a for-profit kind of relationship. It's true and above board. To me, that's the foundation of what a mentor can be. And from the mentor standpoint, sometimes they're difficult conversations, and sometimes you say, you know, you'd have to talk about somebody's the way they appear, what they say. Sometimes they can be difficult. I once had a very famous CEO, and I had to tell him that one of his children were not behaving in the company the way he envisioned. And that was not an easy conversation.
I'm sure he appreciated it.
Yeah, he did.
So I think we got a few more minutes before we open up to Q&A, but I have to ask these two questions. We talked about public boards, we talked about private companies. What about nonprofits?
Yeah.
And are boards on nonprofits any different than public boards?
Yeah, totally. My personal feeling is that not-for-profit boards are important from the standpoint of giving back to the community. They are not important as a background for serving on a public company board. Most of the private not-for-profit boards, the rationale is that, one, there's a lot of people, and two, it is a fundraising opportunity. So there are expectations when joining a board. I would say, I'm talking about not-for-profits, I would ask, what are your expectations for contributions? And some of them are not insignificant. And if you're not prepared to run that development as they envision it, that's an issue. And the second is, if you're going to join a not-for-profit, now, and I'm not diminishing the importance of not-for-profits. I've served on plenty of them. I have certain passions, and you should have a passion for the board you're going to join. I have certain passions. I love symphony and been on symphony boards. I've been on community boards. I was on the board of the State Economic Development for the state of California board. Those are important to give back. They don't provide the basis for for-profit boards.
Okay. Even if you were on the audit committee or the
well, there's
or the
well,
nomination
there
committee?
are in not-for-profit boards. There's very few committees and very few members. So that if you were a member of the deciding group, and normally I'm going to hypothetical. Let's say that a not-for-profit has 20 board members. There's probably 5 or 6 that really do all the work and make the decisions for where the not-for-profit is going.
So last question before we open up a QA, and I'd be remiss if I don't ask this one. You're on the board of Children's Place, $2 billion in revenue and over 1,000 retail stores. It must be really interesting, but a challenging time to be in retail. Give us some insights on where the future of retail is going and brick and mortars.
Well, it is not out of business. And my belief is that if you are into what's commonly called clicks and bricks, clicks being online or direct to customer. I don't like to say online. I just like to say direct to customer, because there's more than one way to have that relationship. And brick and mortar, physical stores. The combination is important. Now, what happened, like anything, we are a pendulum swinging business society, and we have this herd mentality of pendulum to one particular side versus the other. So we became so overstored. There was so much retail space that it wasn't possible for all companies that were in a brick and mortar kind of business to succeed. So being unique to a customer, understanding the customer better than anybody else is the key to success, and providing that customer a unique experience. And the experience can be physical, it can be emotional, but there are companies who understand what it is to have that kind of relationship with the consumer.
And I think it was prior to COVID, still 70% of business was done in retail stores. You know, Amazon is obviously the growing and
the elephant in the room. Yeah. Amazon has got a unique position. I always thought you had to be in business to make money. They proved the first kind of 10 years they're in business, you didn't have to make money to grow and be a successful company. And they've done it brilliantly. So, you know, how do you compete with them? I think the worst way to compete is by price. I think there are other ways to compete, and that would take a long time for this discussion.
So I think we can open it up to questions.
Can we talk about the idea of including blue-collar workers and lower-level white-collar workers on the board of directors to represent their gender or ethnicity?
Yeah, you know, that is a common today interest of people, that, you know, you only got these high-powered people joining the boards and former CEOs like myself. And are you inclusive relative to the total workforce or to the total opportunity space? I don't see why not. Now, it's going to be substantially more difficult to get the foot in the door and that kind of unique experience and having an opportunity. And I would think that I guess it's United Airlines is one example where they've done that. I'm not too sure how many other companies I can name that have included employees, but I think the first step in the door would be employees of the various companies to be portion of the board. Or it can be a unique opportunity to gain a different perspective with a unique committee that advises the CEO and the other board members. Because I think most people think that they don't have any exposure to the board. I think boards make a mistake if they don't have interaction with large groups of people that work in a company. Town hall meetings or various kinds of meetings that interaction could take place.
Thank you so much. I have another question. Hi, Robert. I just wanted to ask how to encourage diversity and inclusion on C-suite boards in the finance industry. While being previously dubbed as pale, male, and still, female luminaries such as Jane Fraser, CEO of Citigroup, and Amanda Blank, CEO of Aviva, are shaking up the status quo. How should we keep this dynamic going strong?
Well, you know, I just saw a particular piece written by Jamie Dimon, who, you know, is JP Morgan Chase's CEO and often quoted as one of the best CEOs in America. And he's a strong advocate for diversity on boards and in the finance area. And so is Warren Buffett. Interesting that Buffett's companies normally have kind of a hometown feeling when he's bought a furniture company, he's bought an ice cream company, he's bought a shoe company. Interesting that he sees that as part of America and where we are and where the growth may come from. And so the more people that we get that have that kind of understanding, the more opportunity space will appear.
When there is or has been toxicity on a board, what is the best method to address the person or the issue? This can be a fragile situation, and approaching it with confidence and directness is important.
A lot of companies have either a hotline or a a way to have people contact senior management without the fear of retribution. I think the best part of that is when it's administered by an outside group or person who then, doesn't have any axe to bear and certainly would not be responsible for any pushback on an employee, like a whistleblower situation. I've been in companies where the board is always updated on activity of what issues the employees have. And it's a part of at least one meeting a year. When we set agendas as boards, we set agendas that we want to hear from the company on. It's not only that the company is reporting their results and their opportunities and their strategy to a board, but the board also has responsibility of what the expectations are of the company. And so we used to have at least one meeting a year where we talked about employee satisfaction.
Thank you, Bob. What advice do you have for students who want to be on a for-profit board? What stage in your career should you be in, and what is the recruitment process like?
Well, that's a tough one, because I think that people that are just starting out and who are still students, that you need to bring the experience level and levels of success based on what you have done. If you're going to bring that kind of status, call it status, to a board. My opinion is that you got to get very good at unique skill set. I mentioned it before, but I would concentrate not only on the job you have, but the areas where you can bring your expertise to a board.
Thanks, Bob. Do employee-owned businesses tend to have more or less diverse, equitable, and inclusive boards of directors?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with too many employee-owned businesses. Some employee-owned businesses that I am familiar with started out as a public company, and when the company was either bought or sold, they gave a good portion of the proceeds to employees in the ESOP. That's the stock ownership plan for employees, and the employees then had a seat at the table, and that's an interesting dynamic. Rare, but certainly one that has some good benefits for people, but especially in large companies.
Thank you. Working as an executive in a privately held company that could definitely benefit from a board of directors, what are some ways to influence private ownership to embrace a board of directors?
I wish I knew sometimes, because I think when people have asked me, I've been very vocal about this point, and I think it is crucial for companies to understand the value that a committee process could bring to them. A lot of companies, especially private companies, don't want to spend the money for consultancies. You go to a McKinsey, a Bain, and the price tag is very, very high. My opinion is, if you've got advisors to the board or to the company, pardon me, not the board, but to the owners, advisors can be enormously helpful in changing the thought process and moving toward a public view of a company.
So we know you're involved with the children's place. How do you get children involved or children's opinions involved in the board?
Well, let me give you somewhat of an example of this. When I was CEO of a company, it was at Robinson's, and my kids were small, and they had a program at their school that they invited either dads or moms who were in business to come and make presentations to the students. And my daughter, they asked me to do this, and my daughter came to me and said, you know, you better be good, because the other day, and I will say it was a Mr. X who ran a very big entertainment company, was there, and he was terrible. And so, you know, I felt the pressure. So, you know, I did most of the presentation on what would appeal to the audience that I was talking to. So I brought in tons of clothing for kids that age and asked them to make the choices of what they'd like to see in a store. So as you involve people in the decision-making process, it's a great way to make sure that they feel respected and that you get their opinions.
Do you think the role of CEO and chairman should be separate in public companies?
Absolutely.
Why not?
Well, you've got too much invested in one decision maker. I think people make a mistake sometimes when they're searching for an executive, that they're looking for only one person who has all the answers. My opinion is that sometimes it's two people. One is CEO. You got to have a boss, but you have to also invest in other people who are decision makers in the company.
What resources do you recommend for identification of diverse board talent? Using networks tends to reinforce a static board demographic.
You know, there are, you can look at numbers of public boards and take a look at the board members. You know, when some people talk to me about companies, one of the first things I do is I go to the board of directors, it's online, and I look through and see who's on their board, what their backgrounds are, and sometimes even have contacted those people for advice on people that they know that might be great prospective board members.
One last question here, and we could have a little time for another one if you have any other questions. Many private companies have an advisory board, especially when the ownership is limited to the founder. When should they consider a formal board?
There's got to be a certain volume level, and that would dictate the process of having committees and having a board. And especially, as I say, in this very litigious country of ours, where boards are suspect to suit, whether they're public or private. They're certainly open when they misbehave. And listen, we've got a lot of misbehaving going on in our country today, and I don't want to get into politics, but you know, there's a lot of misbehaving on all spectrums. So I think that's got to be the founder's got to be open for that kind of inclusion of people helping. And I'm a kind of against board of advisors. A board of advisors, you know, is almost like one person against another person. I think the CEO of a company, private company, ought to have one, maybe two, but one advisor helping them on this early stage.
Kush, do you have any last comments? Bob, any last advice that you guys want to share with the audience before we close this event?
Well, the only thing I would say that if somebody had something that they either were uncomfortable asking or thought of later, if they'll email you all, I'd certainly be open to answering some of those questions.
We appreciate it, and we will ask, we will send an email so people can respond to that email. Kush, anything else?
By the way,
Final comment?
also, what didn't I always ask, what didn't I say that people would have liked to have known or heard? And did you find this helpful at all?
Tell us a story of a time where you felt as a board member, you made a huge impact, maybe diverted a bad decision. How much impact can a single board member have, or is it difficult to move this ship?
Well, it's difficult, but in one company we decided that we ought to have a strategic committee of the board. That's very tricky because, as I say, the board doesn't run the company, the CEO does. That being said, the CEO was very open to participating in a strategic discussion. And the company was looking for, should we have a different avenue of how to approach the consumer different from where we are today? And the decision came down to that would be the worst thing to do for this particular company. And what we did was emphasize where we were and the unique aspects of where we were and how to improve the strategy. And it worked, and it worked very well. And it became a different marketing tool, but it didn't change basic strategy of the company.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and share your fascinating experience. I know that at least for Kush and myself, it has been amazing to be here with you and learn so much. Kush, we're so proud and grateful to have you as an alum and a great Rady champion. In Ordonez, Rady students, alumni, faculty, staff, and friends, thank you for joining us this morning. Stay tuned for the next one.
Stay safe, everybody.